Alessandra Tocco, the president of the New York Alternative Investment Roundtable. And today I'm pleased to introduce our 5 for 5 series. The series highlights 5 women who've had long careers on Wall Street, answering the age-old question, what advice would you give your younger self? Alexandra Lebenthal is a senior advisor at Houlihan Lokey's Financial Sponsors Group, where she leads an initiative focusing on female-led companies. Prior to joining Houlihan Lokey in 2020, she was the CEO of Lebenthal Holdings, a municipal bond firm founded by her grandparents in 1925, which she joined in 1988. By 1995, she was the firm's president and CEO at the age of only 31. Alexandra has received numerous awards and recognitions throughout her career, with honors including being named one of New York's 100 most influential women by Crain's New York Business and one of the top 50 women in wealth management by Wealth Manager magazine. She was also included in Crain's largest women-owned businesses and Fast 50 lists in 2013. Alexandra is a member of the C200, the leading organization for women in business, and an advisory board member of Enterprise Technologies, Inc. Alexandra, if you could go back in time and give yourself, your younger self, some advice on career development, what would you tell yourself?
I always pause over that question because I feel this sense that somehow I have an answer that I could have given my younger self, and that would have shaped the direction that I took. But I think what I actually would say is that whatever choices you make will be a part of your journey to wherever you're going to go. There are no wrong choices. They're just going to be steps along the path. There will be steps that you'll stumble on. There'll be steps that you'll leap over. But you'll learn along the way from each and every step that you take. So I think that's really the advice. Just, don't sweat it. Don't think that there's a perfect answer, because there really isn't. There's no wrong answer.
Was there anyone who was particularly influential in your career? I know you were fortunate enough to have a family that was steeped in the financial services industry. But outside of your immediate family, was there someone who really helped you along towards your path?
There were actually a lot of people, and I always think about this in perspective of thinking about mentors, because I think oftentimes there's this assumption that one mentor will be waiting for you at the start of your career and they'll be with you throughout. But in fact, there are certain people who have great influence over your career at certain points in your life. And I would say there are really 3 people that fit that. One is actually somebody who worked for me, but he joined the company shortly after I became CEO and had 30 plus years of experience. And so really, actually, while he was working for me, taught me a lot and taught me about, ensuring that I didn't fall prey to some of the mistakes that he had made along his way. And then there are 2 other people. One was legendary person, Jimmy Lee, who was vice chairman of JP Morgan, who was just an incredible mentor, an incredible sponsor for me, even though I was in my own company. But I really observed in him the power of a network and power of staying connected to your network, even when you can't do anything for them and they can't do anything for you. And then the third person is someone who is still a very, very dear friend, a woman named Barbara Byrne, who was vice chairman of Lehman, vice chairman of Barclays. She's now on several public and private boards, and just somebody who is so thoughtful, so smart, so strategic, and really has this ability to kind of see through all of the clutter, recognize the clutter, but at the same time kind of see the bigger, longer picture. So I would say those are 3 people that have had huge influence for me in my career.
Maria Fiorini Ramirez, who is the president and chief executive officer of Maria Fiorini Ramirez, Inc., an independent global economic and financial consulting firm that advises some of the largest institutions in the world. She's also the owner of MFR Securities, a women-owned minority broker-dealer subsidiary. Maria has almost 5 decades of experience in financial markets. She served as a director of multiple banks and investment firms, both in the US and Europe. She is on the boards of Metropolitan Commercial Bank, Security Mutual Life, and others. She is also on the Investment Policy Committee of Edward Jones and Company and BNY Pershing's Institutional Client Advisory Board. Outside of her professional affiliations, she sits on numerous charity boards and is chairman of quite a few of them. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Maria and ask her that age-old question. If you had the opportunity to talk to your younger self as you were starting your career, what would you say? What advice would you give? And what advice would you give your younger self as you were climbing that corporate ladder?
Well, what I would tell myself is not to work as hard as I did. I think that working full time, going to school at night, taking care of all the, younger members of the family was really a lot. And only last night, I remember that I did pass out a couple of times in the subway because I didn't eat breakfast in the morning. So I think looking back is like, you realize, gee, my God, I was doing so much more then in terms of, the stress that you put on yourself. You want to get your degree instead of 6 years, you want to do it in 4 years or 3 years. Or, you want to excel at your job, so you take on more, longer hours, whatever, and you don't take care of yourself. And the years go by really fast. So I would say I would not have put as much stress on myself as I did. But also, I would have thought of starting my own business earlier. So I didn't start my business until I was, 41, 42. If I had done it earlier, I think I would have been, much more, I'd taken advantage of opportunities. But I think, to credit to myself, I've really been very good in maintaining relationships. And if I were to think backwards, I could have done even a better job in investing in your relationships long-term, whether it's family, whether it's friends, whether it's people that you come across in life with different experiences. I think those are really your lifeline support for the long term, whether you're going through, personal issues, career issues, whatever it may be, business. It's really having that strong grounding with your friends, your lifeline around you that helps you a lot. And I think looking backwards, you could always do a better job at that. Do less things that you think you could do it all and ask others to help you. It just makes life a lot easier. But I think that, I've always believed that I could do it all by myself. And I think looking backward, it would have been better if I had taken some shortcuts and asking others to move things for me. But I think that overall, it's been fine.
I'd say it's better than fine, Maria, but you're being humble. You've built quite a impressive business. So what I'm hearing from you is taking good care of yourself mentally and physically, getting the rest you need is important early on in your career, and building relationships was the key differentiator for you as you went out to build your own business. Am I correct?
Yes. And in many ways, you mentioned, the boards and things that I've been involved in, and all those things came about through relationships. Early on in the 70s, the 80s, and the 90s, The people that got on board were relationships from, Ivy League schools that people had among each others. And, having gone to Pace at night was certainly not the Ivy League that, got you on the boards, but I certainly did do that even though. And I think that, those relationships are people that know you sometimes better than yourself in terms of what value you could bring to an institution, what your skill sets are, what your good talent contribution are. And some people see that in you more than you could see it for yourself. And they open doors for you. So I call it more like your marketing agents to your opportunities in life.
In this segment, we are fortunate to hear from Allison Berman, who is the president and CEO of Palisade Capital Management, a private asset management firm launched in 1995, which currently manages approximately $5 billion of client assets. Allison joined Palisade in 2011. Prior to that, she was a corporate attorney at Skadden Arps, where she specialized on advising clients on M&A transactions, both in the public and private markets. Allison graduated from the Cardozo School of Law and Brown University. Allison, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts on your career with us today. And I'm going to ask you that age-old question. If you could go back and talk to your younger self as you were starting in your career, what advice would you have?
I don't know where to begin. There are times I wish I could hand the secret manual to younger Allison and it would be made up of little pictograms like an IKEA catalog laying out, where I should have zigged and zagged along the way, but that would have taken a lot of the fun out of the journey. But in all seriousness, if I really could go back and give myself one real piece of advice, it would be to never be afraid to be yourself. Always stand up for who you are and give yourself a voice. I think that, when I think of my career, and especially at the beginning, and even throughout my life at that time, I had this self-inflicted wound that I find many women in particular and successful women suffer from, and that's self-doubt. And it's something that I really had to work on overcoming. And if I could tell younger Allison, it would be, don't be afraid, stand up, have that voice. This self-doubt that holds many, many people back is something I think we need to explore where it comes from for ourselves individually so we can overcome it, but also understand where it comes from, because I do think it's something many women in our industry face along the way. And there are aspects of the culture, particularly in the financial services industry. I came up through, the legal side, but very much on the, deal side, the M&A side. And there are these subtle messages that are given to women, some of them not so subtle, some of them very overt. And those are messages that, to succeed as a woman, you have to almost play a certain role. You have to fit in a certain way. You have to dress a certain way. You have to act a certain way. And, it's almost as if that women have to fit into a certain archetype in order to be successful. And, younger Allison listened to those messages. And that was a big, big struggle for me, because it planted these seeds of self-doubt, because I think the natural consequence of many of these messages of dress a certain way, present yourself a certain way, have a very negative consequence, and they morph into messages of conform and fit in, not just in how you present yourself, but how you think and how you give voice to things and to your ideas. And then, that creates all these, groupthink, all these things that there are books now about, of how we need to avoid those traps. So I would tell younger Allison, be yourself, stand up for yourself, and never be afraid of who you really are inside.
I think that's great advice. And I know, having been a banking executive for many years, The guys had no problem asking for more money, and the women never asked for more money and never came in to advocate for their bonuses. And we had some programs where we were trying to change that, but it's when you manage a team, you really do see the difference. So that's wonderful advice. Was there anyone along the way who really helped you? Did you find any sponsors to help you think outside of the box and to, embrace yourself versus the group think?
It's so interesting because I look at myself in a particular generation of women coming up in business and in women, who have real careers. And I give credit to my family. My whole life, growing up, it was assumed I would do something in business. And I never had these, messages. It was something that was, just part of everyday life. Oh, and when what field would you like to go into? But as I, think about things, I feel like there was this generation ahead of me of the glass ceiling breakers. And I did have one woman in particular who was a fantastic mentor for me in many ways. And she was part of this glass ceiling breaking generation. And I think she gave me both some great advice and also some not so great advice, because, for her to be successful in business, she had to fit into a certain type of mold where, she definitely spoke up for herself, but some of her advice came with these aspects of also, if they're going to take you seriously when you step in, you have to present yourself a certain way. You have to show up a certain way. And yes, advocate for yourself, but there are kind of specific ideas on how exactly to do that. And, I think, with advice, you always have to take everything with a grain of salt. I think if it weren't for her, I would not have done many of the things that I've done in terms of business, in terms of my career, in terms of even taking risk. But I also wish she didn't give me that lecture about the appropriate footwear to wear when going into a boardroom.
That's certainly basically from my generation.
I'm sorry. No, I don't mean to interrupt. I think for me in particular, these messages of dress a certain way, I think that holds us back. And that holds us back as individuals. And that's something that held me back as an individual for a long time. I think as a woman who didn't always fit into these traditional conceptions of femininity, as a gay woman, to be in an environment where I felt like those were pieces of me I had to hide. And when I was able to step into that and kind of, I don't want to sound too West Coast, but, actualize myself and lean into that and really embrace that within myself, it made all these other things that I think when we talk about advice we give women of, ask for more, don't be afraid to speak up, don't be afraid to ask questions. All of that became so much easier for me when I was able to say, hey, I'm not going to fit into a traditional role. I'm going to be, who I am. Believe me, I didn't show up into boardrooms wearing, ratty clothes, but I was able to find things that expressed who I was, were appropriate for the environment, but also allowed me to be who I was.
Dr. Sunal Desai is the Executive Vice President and Chief Investment Officer for Franklin Templeton Fixed Income, where she oversees the firm's municipal corporate credit, floating rate, multi-sector, global, and money market fixed income teams. She's also a portfolio manager for a number of strategies, including Core Plus, Strategic Income, and Total Return, among others. Dr. Desai is a member of the Franklin Resources Executive Team, where she helps shape the firm's overall strategy, and she also manages its investment committees. She began her career as an assistant professor of economics at the University of Pittsburgh and went on to spend over 6 years at the IMF in Washington, D.C. After that, she joined the private financial sector, joining Dresdner Kleinworth Wasserstein in London as a director and senior economist. She was part of the Templin Global Bond Fund portfolio management team that Morningstar named its Fixed Income Manager of the Year in Canada in 2013, and has consistently been named to the Barron's annual list of 100 most influential women in U.S. finance since its introduction. With that, I'll ask Dr. Desai the question that we've been asking the other 5 for 5 participants, and that is, Dr. Desai, if you could go back and advise your younger self when you were just starting your career, what advice would you have for yourself? And maybe what advice would you have for young women as they're starting to climb the financial ladder?
Okay, great questions. I'd say to my younger self, I'd ask myself to do 2 things. One of them I still don't do very well, and that is to learn how to network. It's really important. It needs to be, you can be shy, and I am shy, and therefore I don't network well, even today. And I think we need to network. We need to learn how to do this, not just with women, just learning how to network. Be in touch with people. That's one thing I would beat myself up about. And the second thing would be, to push harder. I think that, and I have seen this again and again, I certainly was subject to this, and I see this even today. As women, as we start our career, we're less likely to actually say, we've done something, that we are good, to actually be pushy, to go out there and do that uncomfortable thing of telling your boss that you actually deserve a promotion. It's very hard. I actually almost would tell myself, okay, this is a play, I'm going to go on a stage, and this is recently. I did not do this when I was younger. I'm going onto a stage. The role I'm going to play is somebody who is going to tell their boss that they are unhappy. Now, you have to learn how to do that, whether it's with your pay, whether you need a promotion, whether you've been passed over, whether you've done something which was not acknowledged. And I think these are very, very important things. I think that advice I'd give to especially young women who are starting their careers in finance today is take risk. Women, again, tend to disproportionately not take risk. We need to learn how to take risk with our careers, with our investments. Sometimes you can't wait until you have every answer to make a decision. And especially with your career, when I think about the number of different jobs that I've done, I would say the last 3 or 4 jobs I've done, I have not done to get a higher salary. In fact, when they started off, the compensation was often lower. You take the risk because the opportunities potentially are going to be greater as you look forward. I'd say those would be my 5 cents.
Let me ask you one more question.
Yeah.
Along the way in the networking, I hear you on that as well. I think it's hard to put yourself out there. Some people it comes naturally too.
Yeah.
And others, like myself, quite frankly, it like you just said, it doesn't. Were there any people along the way that helped you kind of break into networking, or was there a sponsor or a group that you were part of that helped you overcome your apprehension?
I haven't overcome it yet, which is why I would say it is something that I would say I'm still not good at. So I can't give useful advice here. I can just say that I've seen other people. When you're shy, you don't go out to introduce yourself. You don't actually actively go out to be sociable. And sometimes it's a part of work to actually spend some time at the water cooler, get to know other people, have coffee with people, try to make sure that when you change jobs, you stay in touch with the people who were close to you. It's a skill, and it's difficult. And I would say it's something I'm advising my younger self, but Lord, I should take it myself today. So I can't give you much more advice than I look around and I see other people who do it very well. And I'm genuinely, I admire them, because it requires you to put yourself out there. And sometimes you just have to do it. So unfortunately, nothing great to offer. But I would say one other thing. In my career, I would say that I have found mentors around me, and I would always say, find your champions where you find them. I now, for the first time in my career, have a boss who's a woman. My entire career, I have had bosses who are men. And most of them were wonderful. And I think you look around and find your champions where you can find them. You don't have to look for exactly somebody who fits your image of what you want to be. Find your champions.
Ali Tocco began her career as a fund-of-funds analyst for Morgan Stanley, where she eventually was promoted to manage the team. From there, she moved to the prime brokerage business at JP Morgan, where she managed three important areas: capital introductions, consulting, and the content and research effort which she initiated. Ali is a managing member of RBT Advisory and sits on numerous boards, including the National Board of the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society. Ali, since you were the interviewer on the other four interviews, I think you know the question, and it's an important one. What would the older Ali Tocco tell or advise the younger Ali Tocco as it applies to a career in Wall Street and in alternative investments?
Well,
Ali?
first of all, thanks, Dan, very much for the kind introduction. I think my advice isn't just for advice for your career on Wall Street. I think it's just sage career advice. And I think in talking to the other women, there is a common theme that I've heard, and I feel the same way. I think it's be authentic. Understand that no one has it all figured out. Don't put too much stress on yourself, believing that you should have it all figured out. You shouldn't, especially early in your career. You should be learning and absorbing and not afraid to ask questions. I think communication skills are critical to success. And if I had to do it over, I'd spend more time on building out that part of my toolkit. But truly, I think not being afraid to ask the question, not being afraid to tackle the hard project, and just being authentic to yourself is what I would think about. Additionally, if I could go back in time, I would tell my younger self to spend more time on myself, exercise, diet. So as an older person, I don't have to worry about it as much. But that's just sage advice for growing older, I guess. And then I guess if I think about it, I think traveling as much as you can and keeping your mind open and learning about other cultures, especially if you're working in a global environment, I think it's a critical skill set to develop. So those are the things I would tell my younger self.
So I have one question, and for full disclosure, Ali and I have known each other for most of the time that we've both worked on Wall Street, which is now quite a long time. And Ali, I think one of the advantages you had was that you were a relatively young mother. And when it came to managing your people, I think it really was helpful that you had people working for you who were roughly the age of your son. Do you think that helped you in your career at all?
Well, I think it helped me understand the psyche of the generation that I was charged with managing. I think juggling being a young mom and a career is easier than you think. However, it takes a village. So if you don't have that village, I would imagine it's much more difficult. So I don't want to minimize that at all. But I do think being a mom certainly helped me understand some of the issues the younger people who worked for me were having. So I think that helped me mentor them